Welcome. Thank you for joining our Enterprise Content Management Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Harv Martins of ToDo will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, webinar logistics, direction for post-webinar collaboration, and our discussion topic, the latest from the FDA, preparing for the new Module 1 and validation criteria. Our guest speaker, Harv Martins, has over 33 years of experience in life sciences, information systems development, and has served for over 14 years on the ICH M2 Expert Working Group. He's the creator of GECCO, the leading eCTD viewer and validator software solution, which is now part of the ToDo product line. He also helped to form IRISS and has served as the leader of all three eCTD, tools, inoperability, and compliance study projects. The first two under ICH M2 direction, and the third one, which is currently in progress, under the direction of IRISS. The content of our presentation will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, followed by questions and answers. We'll invite you to post any questions for the team via the iLink message board. It's on the lower left of your screen, or you can join the discussion on LinkedIn and post questions there. Alternatively, I'm happy to address questions offline as well. My contact is rmelody@usdatamanagement.com. We want to make sure that you're looking at the appropriate screenshot there. So if you'll notice, there's a tab titled The Latest from the FDA about center screen. Make sure that you've clicked on that so that you can stay current with the presentation as the slides advance. I want to let you know that US Data Management is focused exclusively on the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing IT, quality, and regulatory IT compliance professional service solutions. Our various dedicated practices include PLM, ERP, CRM, GRC, ECM, and clinical and drug safety. We're headquartered in Ventura, California, and we've delivered more than 1,000 successful projects with over 150 life science clients. We offer hands-on experience assisting clients under regulatory distress, and we're the market leader for validation accelerator packs. Here are just a few clients. Give you a moment there. We so appreciate you joining us today, and we trust the information will be useful for you all. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Harv.
Thanks, Becky. Let me tell you first a little bit about ToDo and about this presentation. ToDo provides software solutions for creating and managing regulatory submissions. These include eCTD, NICE, CTD on paper, and pretty much any structured format from any country. ToDo is also the provider of the review tool used by the EMA and most of the national authorities in Europe. Regarding this presentation, first of all, let me put things in perspective. I'm going to be presenting from the point of view of a software designer. And as a software designer, I'm faced with various challenges for implementing these validation criteria and for implementing the new Module 1. As the creator of Gecko, I need not only to understand them, but to implement them in a tool that clearly and accurately displays results to the user. I hope this presentation will help you understand the reasons for some of the different outcomes you get from different eCTD validators, and maybe some areas in which you should focus and pay close attention as the FDA moves toward implementation. So first of all, we'll cover the new validation criteria. It was released in December 2010 as a draft 2.0. It includes additions and deletions of error codes. Now, the first validation criteria, version 1, was released in 2008, March of 2008. So basically, we've been dealing with this for almost 3 years now. Well, actually, a little over 3 years. And the version 2 is not yet implemented. It's subject to change. It is in draft form. there are comments going back to the FDA, so one of the outcomes of this could be comments from you going back to the FDA. Any changes will be reflected in the document posted on the FDA website. So far, no changes have been posted. Let me get used to this advanced function. Okay. So I won't get too technical, I promise, but it's important to understand, in order to understand validation criteria, a little bit of the technical underpinnings. As you know, the eCTD is based on XML, and in XML, the rules are defined by a DTD. We're currently at version 3.2 of the DTD, and the ICH some time ago found interoperability issues between tools, so we defined key issues for interoperability in something called Q&A 36, which you can find on the ICH website. The most important basic test of a valid eCTD is to make sure that the XML is valid. And there's this concept of a tool called a parser, a validating parser, which is actually free from Microsoft and others. And so you can actually easily check the XML backbone of an eCTD to make sure that it complies with the rules of the DTD. So I talked about the new validation criteria versus the old. There's 58 total new, which is a huge number. And I think that speaks to the experience that the FDA had with the version 1.0. There were a lot of problems, and if you have experience with submissions to the FDA, you may know that they stopped actually returning results for for the medium and the lower severity rules, and were only acting on the higher severity rules. So out of the 58 new, there's 4 new high, 38 new medium, and 16 new low. 14 total rules were removed, and 7 of those are high severity. This is kind of surprising to me because these are considered critical, and high severity means that your submission will be rejected. So there were actually 7 rules that are actually still currently in effect that basically don't work. So as I've implied already, there were many problem rules. They've been rewritten and actually improved. Some rules were removed, and as far as I'm concerned, there are still some problems, and I'm going to try to outline those for you. Also, in this new set of rules, the source is provided. Now, this is very useful. In the previous set, or actually the currently implemented set of validation criteria, the source is not quoted, so sometimes you're puzzled as to where this information came from. As I mentioned, severity levels, you may be familiar with this. The severity levels aren't really changing, but it's important to note that a high severity level means the submission is considered not received by the FDA. Medium severity level means the submission might be considered received by the FDA. There's no commitment on their part. I find when I review this new set of validation criteria that there are a lot of improvements, and what we hear from the FDA is they will be getting tougher on the validation criteria. So they're going to start to enforce them uniformly across the board because they consider these rules to be fixed. There's a heavy emphasis on document quality and fillable forms. So all those fillable forms you can download from the FDA website, the content of those forms is going to be checked against the rest of your submission, including the attributes in the XML. There's a heavy emphasis on PDF validation, which there wasn't in the past. These are the rules that were removed, and I'm just going to draw attention to a few of them. These are 4 high severity rules removed that were not replaced. You'll see some others that were removed and replaced. These actually basically were found to be inoperative. These rules would never trigger. Now, one of the things from a software creator's point of view is we had to build validators, excuse me, we had to build validators that would implement these rules. So that was for the past 3 years. So it was a little difficult. These are new high errors in version 2, in the draft version 2. And just I want to draw your attention to this one. It says more than one version of the U.S. Regional XML File exists. Now, if you're familiar at all with how Windows works, you can only have one file by one name in one folder. So I actually don't know how this could ever occur. These are new medium level errors, and I want to draw your attention to 1102. Even though this is an improved rule over some previous content, a similar rule, they still have an issue here with characters that are not permitted, but actually these characters are not possible. You can't put a greater than or less than in an XML content without causing a parse error. This rule 1119 says a required file in the util folder is missing. Now, it doesn't define what is a required file, so this is going to be difficult to implement. This rule 1136 says omitted leaf element path. Now, and when considering this rule as a developer having to implement this, I need to know what is a valid path. For example, double quotes with a space between could be a valid path. Now, technically, from an XML point of view, that would pass. Also, the Rule 1357, omitted attribute value incorrect placement. This is really an undefined situation. It says you did not specify a required attribute such as manufacturer. But actually, if you read the Module 3 specification, the manufacturer is an optional attribute. And once again, in 1362, it says if you, for example, provided two manufacturer attributes, this is actually not possible. The XML parser would trigger an error. Here I've placed some rules from version 1 across from equivalent rules in version 2. And I want to draw your attention to the first one, 1276. Leaf element title leads or ends with a space per ECTD specification. Now, there's nothing in the ECTD specification that addresses this, that discusses leading or trailing spaces. So the FDA chose to remove the reference to the ECTD specification and left the rule. And this applies to 1344 as well. 1314 has quoted a source, the ICH Q&A 51. In the previous iteration, they didn't quote the source, and that was a problem because the rule didn't make a lot of sense. But if you read this source, it actually says the folders can contain the ICH and regionally allowed files for other regions as well without causing any issue with validation. So you have submitted files in the util folder that are not required. I don't know how to write that rule. In version 1, we had a rule, document ID for STF must remain constant. This was actually incorrect. It was an error. In discussions with the FDA, I found that the rule was simply misunderstood and misworded. They improved the wording. Actually, I helped them to improve the wording. And it now it accurately says study ID for STF must remain constant. However, this contradicts the STF specification, in which the study ID is actually an attribute that's allowed to change. In 1952, we had something called STF.content title and leaf element title do not match. This actually not only did it not make sense, but there was no basis for it in the standard. This has been corrected to say your STF study title and leaf element title do not match, and the viewer will show the title of the STF only. This is actually not supported by any specification, even though the STF specification is quoted, but it is a limitation of the FDA tool. Here's an example of an actual improvement. They said use of the element title is not recommended, and it refers to the doc content model. Now, the title within doc content is actually permitted. In the new version, it says the title is not visible to the reviewer, so they actually explain the real reason why they don't want this element. There's several rules regarding the validation of PDFs. There are some slightly vague references to broken and corrupt hyperlinks and bookmarks. And in speaking with the FDA, I found that the reference to a broken bookmark means the target can't be found, for example, a missing file. And a corrupt bookmark is defined as the target is found, but it can't be opened. So it's perhaps a corrupt PDF file that can't be opened. So that's the review of the validation criteria. As I said, it's the point of view of a software creator who has to deal with these issues, not a maybe impartial review of improvements of the rules. But I think through an iterative process and feedback to the FDA, we will get further improvement. Now, Module 1 is still not published. So I hope you weren't attending this hoping to get some secret information. This information is based on public presentations, and it's also based on interviews with the FDA. Sorry, the advanced function is a little odd on this system. We'll get there. So the FDA looked at Module 1 and with their experience since 2003 decided they needed to make some changes. They needed to make changes to table of contents, headings, and hierarchy document. It's a useful document available from the FDA website. And they needed to reorganize and update the administrative information section. The changes are consistent with the RPS standard, and you'll see some terminology, if you're familiar with RPS, some terminology that comes from the RPS standard. And now they're going to allow for submissions to multiple applications in one submission instance. This is quite a departure from the previous standard. And a key point of the new Module 1 is to allow the CDER, DDMAC, and CDER APLB to accept eCTD submissions. This is from information from the FDA in a webinar and confirmed by telephone. The target for the draft release of Module 1 is July 1st, 2011, so it's just around the corner. There will be a 60-day comment period, and they hope to implement by year end. As I said, DDMAC was in the main focus of these changes, and for the purposes of DDMAC submissions, they found in Section 115 insufficient headings and hierarchy, and they also found through experience there is inconsistent placement of package information, either 1.14 or 1.15. Excuse me, I'll just take a... I think I cut off there. And there was a lack of naming standards for file names and leaf titles. So there's some examples given of various file names that they see. And I guess they're going to be aiming towards more detailed file names. The Module 1 draft includes more granularity, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and allows for identification of professional versus consumer audience, types of submissions, and type of piece. Also, new media formats, new file formats and media types are defined. Obviously, for advertising materials, so you need new file types and media types. Surprisingly, they've included VHS as a new media type. The administrative section gets some updates. Important part of this is a submission unit. Now, there's an RPS term, and this is going to support this multiple application, via targeting of multiple applications per submission. Also, new technical contact information and new submission types will be defined. Also, there will be a new submission subtype, and the submission subtype will be based on the application type. So an example is an NDA submission, labeling supplement, and a subtype of pre-submission, or application, or amendment. Also, the concept of group submissions will be supported, and this will permit the multiple application numbers per submission instance. Another way of saying that is one set of documents are going to relate to multiple applications. And actually, they have a way of doing this currently, but it's handled differently by CDER and CBER, so they want consistency across the two divisions. As I mentioned, the headings and hierarchy document will be updated. I'm not going to read the entire list, but the most important thing from my past experiences is we finally have a home for the 3674 form. 115, promotional section, there will be additional headings and attributes that are going to allow the identification of professional promotional materials and consumer promotional materials. and consumer and professional material types and type of submission. Now, I've highlighted type of submission because in the interview with the FDA, I was asking how they're going to support this. And actually, they're going to support this by adding attributes into 115. It's going to become a little bit like Module 3. If you're familiar with Module 3, you've got attributes for manufacturer and substance, indication, product, etc. And it can get quite complex, and life cycle can be somewhat complex to maintain. What we're going to see in Module 1 is a move to that type of approach. So these are the FDA's own to-do list items. Update the U.S. regional DTD, and the target is the July 1st target. Update the guidance and specifications. Update the DD-MAC electronic submission guidance, including acceptable file types. And of course, update the FDA ECTD table of contents, headings and hierarchy document, and of course the Module 1 specification. And there will be a comment period, as I mentioned, and of course DD-MAX will require the new Module 1, DD-MAX submissions. So kind of a high-level view of perhaps some advice to you when considering these issues. In order to plan an implementation of a new Module 1, you're going to have to look at some transition issues. You're going to have to look at impact on life cycle. There will be a change in granularity that's going to affect and have some important impact on life cycle of your documents. You should review your document authoring SOPs, specifically with regard to DD-MAC document submissions. And by the way, my orientation is CDER. If you're a biologics company and you submit to CBER, then I guess it's APLB. And focus on PDF compliance. Now, I think we've been getting away with some things regarding PDF compliance, but with the new emphasis and the new rules, it's important to have good validation tools to validate your PDFs. Look at the quality of hyperlinking and bookmarking and make sure that you've got them accurate. In embedded fonts, there are new rules regarding embedded fonts. You're going to have to be a little bit more concerned about whether you're following the guidance on embedded fonts. And the forms that you download from the FDA, the content of the forms now will be checked versus the content of the XML in Module 1 versus, in fact, the folder structure, including the application level folder. So you got to get them right. Some recommendations, additional recommendations for preparing. Work with your vendor or vendors. That's always the case, I think. Ask questions and maybe do some testing. Submit new pilot submissions. Always a good idea when you're starting into some new area. And watch out for structural mapping issues in Module 1 affecting life cycle. As I mentioned, the new 115 section is going to get quite complex, I believe. I haven't seen it yet, but from what I've heard, there could be some issues with mapping from the old to the new. And use more than one validator. As you've seen by the review of the validation rules, it's difficult for anyone to get this exactly right. And finally, join IRIS. I'm one of the people who has helped to found IRIS, so I want to give you just a brief overview, and then I'll turn it back over to Becky. IRIS stands for Implementation of Regulatory Information Submission Standards. The goal is to be a new voice for our multi-industry, multinational stakeholder membership to establish a global, open, multidisciplinary nonprofit organization, which has been established, by the way, and advance technical and electronic regulatory submission standards. We want to be led and managed by experts in their fields without any bias or commercial gain. It was conceived of in 2008. We have about 350 active members and 6 member-driven topic groups. The model of IRIS is a little bit like ICH with topic group leaders, and they hold meetings, in some cases monthly. Excuse me. Each topic group is outlined on the website, and you can actually go there, and I'll show you the domain name, and register for a topic group. It's initially focused on ECTD, but we plan to progress to other standards. I guess I should have removed PIM. This is an old slide. We want to concentrate on clear requirements, universal functionality, and smooth implementation. By the way, the ICH doesn't concentrate on implementation. And there have been problems with interoperability, so therefore the need for a group like IRIS. Encourage and assist data standards to speed the submission process worldwide. And I stress that it's neutral, open to anyone, including small and mid-size and large pharma. Of course, large pharma already belongs to pharma, which belongs to ICH, but these other groups don't have a home to talk about these issues. Health authorities, of course, are part of ICH, but they are an active part of IRIS. FDA often has 2, 3, or 4 people attending some of our teleconferences. Diagnostics and devices, animal health, and biotechs, generics, and providers of services and software. So we have the vendors at the table, and we can all discuss issues together. Here are a few handy resources, including the URL for IRIS. So thank you for listening, and here's some contact information. I have one more slide here with contact information for U.S. data management, and I'll turn it back over to Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Harv. Tremendous presentation. We're going to open the floor for questions, and while I'm giving you a moment to type those questions in, I'd like to remind you that the webinar has been recorded and will be available on the U.S. Data Management website. Generally about a day or so following the presentation, we'll be able to post that, and the site is usdatamanagement.com. We are able to get you connected to Harv directly should you have more specific and direct requests from him. And with that, I can give you our first question. It's from Julie, and she's asking, how long will the transition be during which they accept both versions of Module 1?
So I think this question is on everybody's minds, and the FDA assures everyone there will be a suitable, significant transition period, and I think my own feeling is it's going to be longer than typically provided in Europe to move to a new Module 1, which is often only 6 months. My own guess would be at least 1 year in which they would accept both versions of Module 1.
Tremendous. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Go ahead and type them in now. I know it takes a moment to form those thoughts. Very good, very good. Okay, we do want to thank you for joining us today. We welcome any comments or feedback to assist us with continual improvement, and we're certainly open to suggestions for future presentation topics. We encourage you to join our discussion on LinkedIn and to visit our website to review topics for upcoming webinar events across the various USDM practices. And on behalf of the USDM and XTIDO team, we appreciate the opportunity to team with you towards excellence and compliance. Thank you again, Harv. We wish you all a wonderful day.